Dawn at Althorp House arrives quietly. Mist settles low over the Northamptonshire fields, softening the edges of a mansion that has stood here for more than 5 centuries. From a distance, it looks serene. Perfect lawns, pale stone, a house that seems built to suggest permanence. But Althorp has never been just a beautiful country estate. It is a house that watches history happen and absorbs the weight of every generation that passes through its doors. This is the dark story of Princess Diana's childhood mansion. Althorp House is vast, nearly 13,000 acres of land, surrounding a main house with dozens of rooms, long corridors, hidden staircases, and private wings that were never meant for outsiders. For the Spencer family, it was not a symbol of luxury. It was an inheritance, obligation, a place you were born into rather than chosen. And for Diana Spencer, it was the setting of her teenage years, a home that shaped her long before the world ever learned her name. At first glance, Althorp feels timeless, the kind of place where nothing truly changes. But that illusion breaks the moment you look closer. Every stone carries stories of ambition, power, rivalry, and quiet disappointment. Althorp has survived wars, financial crises, family fractures, and public scrutiny. It has reinvented itself repeatedly to stay alive, even when the cost of doing so became overwhelming. For Diana, arriving at Althorp was not a fairy tale beginning. It was a transition marked by upheaval. Her parents' marriage was collapsing. Custody battles played out behind closed doors. While the estate projected calm and dignity, life inside was anything but simple. Long hallways amplified silences. Large rooms made loneliness harder to hide, and the expectations attached to a house like this could feel suffocating, especially for a young girl still trying to understand who she was. To the public, Althorp would later become a place of mourning. A lake, an island, a final resting place visited by millions in spirit, if not in person. But long before that, it was a private world where Diana learned how to retreat, observe, and endure, where she discovered both the comfort and the isolation that comes with privilege. To understand Althorp's darker story, you have to begin with what it was always designed to be. Not simply a home, but a statement. A house built to last, even if the people inside it struggled to do the same. Althorp did not begin as the grand mansion it is today. Its story stretches back to the early 1500s, when England was still defined by feudal loyalties, shifting crowns, and land as the ultimate form of power. The Spencer family acquired the estate in 1508, not through romance or legacy, but through money. They were sheep farmers first, merchants who understood that land, not titles, was the real currency of survival. At the time, Althorp was a working estate, practical buildings, open farmland, a place designed to produce wealth, not display it. The original house was modest by aristocratic standards, closer to a fortified manor than a palace. But the Spencers were patient. Generation by generation, they expanded their holdings, improved the land, and slowly climbed England's rigid social hierarchy. By the late 16th century, the family had been knighted, then elevated further, rewarded for loyalty to the crown and careful political alignment. Althorp grew alongside their status. Wings were added, courtyards enclosed, decorative facades replaced defensive ones. What had once been functional became performative. The house was no longer just a place to live. It was proof that the Spencers had arrived. They chose Althorp because of its position. Close enough to London to matter, far enough away to remain private. The surrounding land provided income, isolation, and control. From the beginning, this was a place designed to manage distance. Distance from the chaos of court life. Distance from public scrutiny. Distance from consequences. Over the centuries, Althorp evolved into a symbol of stability. While other families rose and fell, lost estates, or fled political disaster, the Spencers stayed. They adapted to new monarchs, new systems, new economic realities. When war swept through England, the house survived. When fortunes thinned, rooms were closed rather than sold. Althorp endured by quietly contracting and expanding as needed. But endurance came at a cost. The house grew heavy with expectation. Each generation inherited not just land, but responsibility. Maintain the estate, preserve the image, protect the name. Failure was not an option because failure at Althorp did not stay private. By the time Diana Spencer was born, Althorp was already carrying 500 years of accumulated pressure. It was not simply a family home, it was a monument to continuity. And monuments do not bend easily to the needs of the people living inside them. Althorp's transformation into the mansion, recognized today, did not happen all at once. It unfolded in layers, shaped by ambition, insecurity, and the constant need to prove relevance in a changing world. Each generation of Spencers altered the house just enough to reflect its moment in history, leaving behind a structure that is both cohesive and quietly fractured. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Althorp underwent its most dramatic expansion. Medieval practicality gave way to symmetry, balance, and display. Grand facades replaced rough stone. Long galleries were built to showcase portraits of ancestors whose importance needed to be seen as much as remembered. Formal gardens stretched outward, turning land into controlled beauty. These changes were not about comfort. They were about status. By the Georgian era, Althorp had become a stage. Guests were meant to be impressed long before they reached the front door. The drive was extended, the approach carefully choreographed, so that the house revealed itself slowly, deliberately. Inside, rooms multiplied. Drawing rooms, libraries, guest chambers, servant corridors. Public spaces grew more elegant. Private ones remained austere. Victorian modifications added modern conveniences, but also new complications. Plumbing, heating, and expanded service quarters increased comfort while quietly locking the family into an expensive cycle of maintenance. Althorp was now too large to be simple and too historically important to be flexible. Every improvement carried the burden of preservation. By the 20th century, the house had become both a treasure and a liability. War forced parts of Althorp to close. Rooms were left unused, furniture covered, wings allowed to fade rather than be torn down. The estate survived by retreating inward, choosing preservation over reinvention. What looked like stability from the outside was often quiet compromise within. When Diana's father, John Spencer, inherited Althorp in 1975, the house stood fully formed, but emotionally hollow. It was beautiful, imposing, and deeply impractical for modern family life. Maintenance costs were enormous. Staff numbers had shrunk. The grandeur remained, but warmth was harder to find. For Diana, Althorp was not something being built. It was something already finished, already defined. A house shaped by centuries of people who had come before her, leaving little room to change its rhythm. She lived inside the result of those transformations, in a mansion that carried the past forward, whether its inhabitants were ready for it or not. Life inside Althorp House was quieter than the estate's size suggested. The mansion was not filled with constant celebration or aristocratic spectacle. Most days passed in routine, shaped by tradition and an unspoken understanding of where each person belonged. For the Spencer family, Althorp was less a grand stage and more a carefully managed private world. By the time Diana moved there as a teenager, the house followed a predictable rhythm. Mornings were subdued. Staff moved efficiently through back corridors, keeping distance. Meals were formal, even when only family members were present. The sheer scale of the house created a sense of separation. It was entirely possible to live under the same roof and rarely cross paths. Diana attended boarding school for much of her adolescence, which meant Althorp was often experienced in fragments: weekends, holidays, summer stretches when the house feels briefly alive. She spent time riding horses, walking the grounds, and seeking quiet corners where she could escape the emotional tension left behind by her parents' divorce. The estate offered freedom, but also isolation. There were acres to roam, yet few places that truly felt intimate. The public rooms of Althorp were treated with respect rather than affection. Certain spaces were preserved almost like exhibits, used sparingly and maintained for appearances. Family life retreated into smaller, less impressive rooms where fireplaces burned and furniture showed wear. The contrast was striking. Grandeur at the front, modesty behind the scenes. Despite its formality, Althorp allowed moments of normality. Diana skated on the frozen lake in winter. She played with her siblings. She laughed with friends when they visited, though their presence always felt temporary. The house reminded everyone that this was not a place designed for childhood ease. It was built for continuity, not comfort. For Diana, daily life at Althorp taught lessons she would carry forever. How to read a room, how to disappear when needed, how to find kindness in quiet moments rather than public ones. The mansion gave her space to observe, to listen, and to feel deeply. But it also taught her how lonely even the most beautiful places can be when silence becomes the dominant sound. From the outside, Althorp House appeared untouched by modern stress. Its long driveways, calm lake, and endless lawns suggested stability and privilege beyond concern. Inside, however, pressure accumulated quietly, the kind that does not announce itself, but settles into routines, relationships, and unspoken expectations. For the Spencer family, the cost of maintaining Althorp was constant and relentless. A house of this size does not rest. Roofs leak, stone erodes, heating systems fail, staff must be paid, gardens must be managed year-round. Every year brought new expenses, and few of them were optional. The estate's history made it impossible to simply downsize or modernize freely. Preservation was not a choice. It was an obligation. These financial pressures coincided with emotional ones. Diana arrived at Althorp during one of the most unsettled periods of her life. Her parents' divorce had been public and bitter, and the fallout reshaped her sense of security. Althorp became both a refuge and a reminder of what had fractured. The house was large enough to absorb conflict without resolving it. Arguments could end without closure. Silences could stretch for days. At the same time, Diana was growing into a young woman under quiet scrutiny. Within aristocratic circles, expectations were clear. Behavior mattered, appearances mattered, vulnerability did not. Althorp enforced those rules without speaking them aloud. There was comfort in tradition, but also pressure to conform to it. The estate's isolation amplified everything. There were fewer distractions, fewer outsiders, fewer ways to escape the emotional weight carried within the family. Diana learned to internalize her struggles, to retreat inward, to find relief through empathy for others rather than attention for herself. The seeds of her later public compassion were planted in these private years. Althorp did not cause Diana's difficulties, but it framed them. It provided beauty without reassurance, space without intimacy, stability without warmth. The house held her during formative years, but it also taught her how to endure rather than how to ask for help. By the time she left Althorp behind, Diana carried its lessons with her. Strength shaped by silence, sensitivity sharpened by solitude. The pressures that built within those walls would follow her far beyond the estate's gates. Diana's time at Althorp did not end with a dramatic farewell. It faded gradually, the way many defining chapters in life do. One day she was a teenage girl retreating into the quiet of the estate. Soon after, she was stepping into a world that would never allow her that kind of privacy again. When Diana left Althorp to begin working in London and later entered royal life, the house receded into memory. It remained her family home, but no longer her center. Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace replaced its corridors. Public attention replaced isolation. Yet the contrast was stark. Althorp had been quiet, watchful, and distant. Royal life would prove relentless and exposed. In hindsight, Althorp functioned as a threshold. It was the last place where Diana could exist without constant judgment. The estate had taught her how to disappear emotionally, how to observe rather than demand attention. Those skills helped her survive early royal life, but they also made her vulnerable. She had learned endurance more than self-protection. The house itself continued its steady existence after she left. Rooms were maintained, the grounds were kept. Althorp adapted as it always had to the absence of one generation and the arrival of another. Diana became a visitor rather than a resident. Her presence there, when it happened, was quieter, more reflective. When her marriage to Prince Charles collapsed, Althorp loomed again in her story, this time as a symbol rather than a home. It represented the life she had known before the crown, before expectation became public property. But returning was never simple. The house carried too much memory, too much unresolved emotion. Diana's death in 1997 permanently altered Althorp's meaning. What had once been her teenage refuge became her final resting place. The estate shifted from private family home to place of collective mourning. A secluded island on the lake was chosen, ensuring privacy even in death. In that moment, Althorp closed one chapter and opened another. It ceased to be only a childhood mansion. It became a memorial, forever tied to the life and loss of the woman the world would never stop grieving. After Princess Diana's death in 1997, Althorp House entered a completely different phase of its existence. The estate was no longer just the private seat of the Spencer family. It became a place defined by absence, memory, and global grief. What had once been shielded by tradition and distance was now permanently connected to one of the most public tragedies of the modern age. The decision to lay Diana to rest on a small island in Althorp's round oval lake was both symbolic and practical. The island provided privacy, protection, and separation from the spectacle that surrounded her death. It ensured that even in burial, Diana would have the peace that had often eluded her in life. The water became a boundary between mourning and intrusion, turning the landscape itself into a guardian. Despite those measures, Althorp could not return to being purely private. The estate became a focal point for collective remembrance. Flowers were laid at its gates. Letters arrived from every corner of the world. Though the public could not access the grave, the knowledge of its presence changed how the house was perceived. Althorp was no longer just a childhood home. It was sacred ground. The Spencer family faced immense pressure in the years that followed. Maintaining the estate grew more complex as public interest intensified. Exhibitions were introduced inside the house, displaying Diana's dresses, photographs, and personal items. These exhibitions served two purposes. They honored her legacy, and they provided essential funding to preserve the house itself. Not everyone approved. Critics argued that Althorp was becoming a museum shaped by grief. Supporters countered that without this transformation, the estate could not survive. The reality was less ideological and more practical. Historic houses are expensive, and memory alone does not pay for roofs, staff, or conservation. Behind the scenes, Althorp remained a working estate burdened by history. Diana's sons visited rarely. For them, it was a place of mourning, not home. The house stood quietly, holding its stories, changed forever by the woman who left it long before the world ever claimed her. Today, Althorp House stands much as it always has, pale stone against open sky, trees framing long paths, a lake that reflects the seasons without revealing what rests at its center. To casual observers, it remains a stately English mansion, elegant and restrained. But its meaning has changed permanently. Althorp's legacy is no longer defined only by architecture or lineage. It is defined by contrast, by the distance between what the house represents and what life inside it often felt like. For 5 centuries, it symbolized continuity, discipline, and aristocratic survival. After Diana, it became something more fragile, a reminder that tradition does not guarantee happiness and beauty does not prevent damage. For the Spencer family, Althorp remains an obligation as much as a home. It must be preserved, financed, explained, and protected. Each generation inherits not just land, but expectation. The house endures by adapting, by opening itself selectively to the public, by allowing its story to be told rather than sealed away. Survival now depends on transparency as much as heritage. For the public, Althorp exists in memory more than reality. Many people will never walk its halls or see the lake in person, yet the image of the estate is deeply embedded in collective consciousness. It is tied to Diana not as a princess, but as a young woman shaped by isolation, sensitivity, and quiet resilience. Althorp is remembered as the place before everything changed. There is no single dark secret buried beneath its lawns, no scandal hidden in locked rooms. The darkness of Althorp is subtler than that. It lies in what the house demanded of those who lived there. Silence, endurance, emotional restraint, the expectation that personal pain should never disrupt the appearance of stability. Diana learned those lessons well. Too well. They prepared her to survive scrutiny, but not to escape it. Althorp gave her empathy, patience, and depth, while also teaching her how to disappear inside herself. The mansion did not create her tragedy, but it shaped the way she carried it. Althorp will likely stand for centuries more. Estates like this almost always do, but its most powerful legacy is already fixed. It is the story of a house that outlasted its inhabitants, a place that offered shelter without safety, and a reminder that even the grandest walls cannot protect a human heart from being seen, misunderstood, or broken. The real story of Althorp is not what it hid from the world, it is what it quietly taught the people who grew up inside it.